And I want to actually start by recounting a meeting that I was at last summer at the National Academy of Sciences. So this was a meeting on planetary protection, and it was a meeting where I was part of a small committee that consisted of some of the greatest minds from around the world trying to understand how we can prevent ourselves from contaminating other planets by sending out biological material and completely destroying the possibility of discovering life beyond Earth, or the even worse possibility of bringing back contamination and destroying life on Earth because we bring back some bug. I was not there as an expert. I was just there as somebody who they thought would be entertaining. But at this meeting, we had a presentation from the lead scientist in the Mars 2020 mission. So this is one of the next missions to Mars where they're going to be collecting samples from the surface of Mars in order to bring them back to Earth one day. And this scientist stood up, and he basically lay into the committee. And he basically said, you are putting all these barriers in place that are preventing us from doing our job. So if you know anything about planetary protection, there are many, many, many hoops to jump through if you want to do certain things on certain planets in order to prevent you contaminating those planets. And he looked at this committee and he said, trust me, I'm a scientist. I know what I'm doing. I do my job well. And you just need to back off and let me do it. And he didn't quite use those words, but that was the impression. And what really struck me was this is a guy that had knowledge, and yet he was doing a really bad job of mobilizing it because all he got was antagonism back as these world experts looked at him, and you could see in their eyes them thinking, who on earth do you think you are? The problem was the hubris of that meeting poisoned any chance of effective mobilization of knowledge in that room. It poisoned the ability to communicate. And this is why I'm particularly interested in this idea of humility when it comes to translating what you know, what's in your head, to other people so that they can actually add value to that knowledge and use it. Here I must confess that I did actually have a little bit of sympathy with this lead scientist. So I'm a physicist, and I spent many years as a physicist working in labs. And any of you who are physicists or who know physicists know that humility is not something that's in our vocabulary. We just know we're right. And we get quite upset when people don't realize this. So I actually had to go through something of a voyage of discovery, going from my physics background, my lab research, to a point where I actually understood better how you begin to connect with different groups and different constituencies when it comes to translating knowledge and information and helping other people add value to that. A large part of that came over a 5-year period when I was the chief science advisor to a project in a think tank in Washington, D.C. And there was an early experience there that completely changed my perception. One of the first things we did with this project, it was a project looking at developing appropriate approaches to ensuring the safety of engineered nanomaterials and nanotechnologies. And one of the things we decided would be great to do is to create a public inventory of all the things you can buy that contain engineered nanomaterials. So we had this online database, and we wanted to publicize it. So at the launch, we decided, why not go over to London, UK, because if there's an excuse to leave America, why not do it? But seriously, we were working with a group in the UK called the Science Media Centre that brings together experts and journalists to dive into complex issues. And I was at a meeting with all of these journalists, and next to me was the CEO of a British company that had done a fantastic job in developing engineered nanomaterials and putting them into sunscreens in a very responsible way. It was a great example of one of the responsible products in our inventory. So we had this press conference, and afterwards I was talking to this journalist, a very engaged, very intelligent young woman. We were talking about what we were doing, and we had a fairly relaxed, casual conversation. And then the day after, I saw the article she wrote. So the woman's name was Fiona McRae, which will mean nothing to you, but has stuck with me forever. And what I didn't realize when I was talking to her was that she was from a little-known news outlet called the Daily Mail in the UK. One of our actually more notorious tabloid newspapers that doesn't really care too much about facts and reality, at least so I thought. What was worse was I'd used a very unfortunate phrase when I was talking to her. And as a result, the gist of the headlines that came out were, leading scientist accuses manufacturers of using consumers as guinea pigs. What was worse was apparently the worst offender here was the company whose CEO was sitting at my side at this meeting. I was mortified, and I was mortified because this article had completely twisted what I was trying to say. But on reflection, I actually realized the problem here was not the reporter, it was not the Daily Mail, it was myself, because I'd been stupid enough, I'd been arrogant enough to think that I could say whatever I liked and knowledge would flow and everybody would get the right idea. How wrong I could be. And in fact, looking back on that, the piece was actually well written. It's just that I'd given that particular journalist fodder for writing something that wasn't exactly what I wanted her to say. So through that experience and through many other experiences, I began to realize that one of the secrets of really effective communication and engagement, and what we now call knowledge mobilization, but then I thought of in terms of how you take knowledge out of somebody's head and give it to somebody else in a way that they can use, is this idea of humility. And understanding that it's not about you, but it's about your audience and how you actually work effectively with that audience. So within that context, what I thought would be interesting to do is to actually cast my mind back and see whether I could actually pull out some of the specific things around this idea of humility and mobilization and communication that might be helpful. And I realize there is a really weird sort of vibe here where I'm talking about humility, and yet I'm going to stand up here telling you about humility in a very humble way. But I'm going to try this anyway. So I have this written down so I don't actually forget any of these points. Just give me a second. So this was the list of 10 things that I came up with that I, looking back, had realized I'd actually learned going from being a lab scientist to somebody who spends more time than I ever thought I would engaging with other people. So the first one actually may be slightly surprising, but it's don't become a victim of excess humility. And I say that because I come across so many academics, scientists as well as non-scientists, who are convinced that they have nothing of importance to say to others and nothing that they know that can be relevant to other people. And what I've realized over time is even if you think you don't have that much to say, you actually have things in your head, you have things that you know, things that you can see that other people can't, and that if only other people had access to them, no matter how small they are, they could actually transform what somebody else does and the decisions they make. So don't fall victim to an excess of humility. Secondly, an obvious one, respect your audience. Remember that when you're trying to translate information, it's all about who you're trying to translate it to. And that brings me to my third point, which is always put your audience first. There is a temptation, certainly within the academy, to think that communication is all about you. You, the person standing on the stage, you, the person pontificating. The reality is, and any good teacher knows this, it's not about you at all, it's about the person you're actually communicating with. That also leads to the fourth point which I came up with, which is always be prepared to learn from others and to listen to others. I learned from many mistakes early on as I moved into the communication and policy world that I didn't know half as much as I thought I did. And the more that I actually learned from others, the better I would become. And sometimes that meant learning from others that I didn't think I should be listening to, including advocacy groups and NGOs and people who I fundamentally disagreed with, people who didn't have a physics degree, surprisingly enough. And I realized actually the world was a much bigger place and a more complex place than I ever imagined it could be. A really important lesson. Lesson number 5 actually uses a word that I really dislike, but sometimes it is very useful. And that is, in knowledge mobilization and communication, do not mansplain. Now, I have to say, and I don't like it because it has certain connotations, but it is such a useful word. But I must say that working with academics, I think mansplaining transcends gender boundaries. And it tends to be an affliction of people who think they know an awful lot that other people should know. And this temptation to jump in and try and explain the world to other people who probably don't need it explaining to them. And part of being humble in communication is recognizing when you're doing that and stopping it. Number 6, another fairly familiar one. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Sometimes we put it on ourselves to try and have the perfect mechanism, the perfect vehicle for translating knowledge from ourselves to others. It is really hard to get there, and the chances are we're going to fail doing that anyway. It's better to be 60 or 70% of the way there rather than make a mess because we wait until we're absolutely perfect when we probably won't be. And it's okay to fail because knowledge communication, knowledge mobilization is about the other person or the other community, the other group, not you. It actually doesn't matter so much if you make a bit of a fool of yourself or don't get it right, as long as the important stuff gets across. And that leads to number 7, which is learn from your mistakes, because in knowledge mobilization, you will make mistakes, an awful lot of mistakes. And that's absolutely fine, as long as you learn from them and you learn to fail forward and fail fast and get better at what you're doing. Number 8 is something that I've actually had to learn the hard way, and that is to remember that people don't have to listen to you and they don't have to pay attention to you. So any good public communicator, anybody that's on social media or who writes books or is involved with other forms of outlets realizes that when you put something out there, nobody has to listen, nobody has to click on your video, nobody has to read your article. And just because you are the greatest person on the planet in your area doesn't mean other people are going to pay any attention. You've got to get out of the mindset of thinking that because you're such a godlike person, people have to listen to you. And you've got to start thinking, how do you actually engage people where they're at so they want to listen to you? 2 more remaining. Number 9. Another obvious one. Engage with others using language that makes sense to the people that you're engaging with. This obviously means be careful with jargon. And I wouldn't actually go as far as to say don't use jargon. Jargon has its purpose. Shorthand in language is very, very powerful. But use it in a way that makes sense when you're communicating. Whatever you do, don't communicate in a language that doesn't make sense to the other person. It's nonsense if you do that. We know that with actual languages from different parts of the world, but somehow we forget about it with our academic languages. And it's oh so easy to fall into that trap of thinking that if we use long, complex words and phrases that go together but actually don't make sense to anybody else, it establishes us as an expert. Actually, it makes you look a bit of a fool, so don't do it. And that leads to the final point, and one that actually leads into today. Be generous in your support of others. Communicating what you know, engaging with others, mobilizing knowledge is really difficult, and sometimes it can be incredibly lonely. And one of the most important things I've found is if you're trying to do this, it makes a massive difference if somebody is supporting you and encouraging you. If you see somebody else trying to translate their knowledge into something of value to someone else, help them out, encourage them, support them, give them the affirmation that they need. That is probably the most important thing here. And it's all about not being hubristic in what you do, but having the humility to support somebody else. And this is why I think that this particular event is so exciting, because what we're able to do here is celebrate and support others in their journey to mobilize their knowledge effectively. Thank you.